Today on the 21st show, at the turn of the 19th century, bicycling was a significant force in American life, and the center of American cycling was arguably in Illinois. From Chicago to Peoria, hundreds of thousands of people turned out for races. Meanwhile, American bicycles were sought after around the world, and no state made more of them than the 21st. We'll talk about all that and more with Christopher Sweet, who's written a book called A History of Bicycling in Illinois, 160 Years of Booms and Busts. I'm Brian Mackey. That's all coming up today on the 21st Show, which is a production of Illinois Public Media, airing on WILL in Urbana, WUIS in Springfield, WNIJ in Rockford, DeKalb, WVIK in the Quad Cities, and WSIU in Carbondale. But first, news. From Illinois Public Media, this is the 21st Show. I'm Brian Mackey. Before Schwinn was a household name, before Chicago had a single protected bike lane, before cars became one of the dominant forces in American life, the 21st state was arguably the center of American bicycling. One trade directory from the 1890s put the Chicago region's share of U.S. bicycle production at roughly 2/3. And by the end of the boom, Illinois led the country in factory employment and output. That boom reshaped everything from courtship to city streets to women's fashions before it went bust, and then boomed again and busted again more than once over the century that followed. My guest today spent nearly a decade digging through archives, scrapbooks, and old cycling magazines to tell that story. Christopher Sweet is the author of A History of Bicycling in Illinois, 160 Years of Booms and Busts. Sweet's also a professor and librarian at Illinois Wesleyan University, the private liberal arts school in Bloomington. Chris Sweet, welcome to the 21st Show. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me. A good overview of the book there in the introduction.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for no, I'm kidding. All right, listeners, our phones are open throughout the hour. You can join us at 800-222-9455. I wonder, do you still have an old bicycle in the family? Maybe a Schwinn you salvaged from Grandpa's garage? Maybe you ride a bike in Illinois today. Can you imagine a time when cyclists were the queens and kings of the road here? 800-222-9455 is the number. 800-222-9455. All right, Chris, take us back to where this book starts in the 1890s. In terms of bicycles, what would an average Illinois main street, Michigan Avenue in Chicago, one of the smaller streets downstate, what would it have looked like on an average weekday afternoon?
Yeah, the book, if we go back even a little bit further, we kind of traced to the first time that I could document that someone rode a bicycle in Illinois, and that would have been about 1868. And that was well before the biggest of the booms. The period that you were talking about was the 1890s. So there was a little minor boom as those early bicycles hit the streets of Chicago and some of the smaller cities around the state in 1868, 69, 70, and then they kind of faded out again and came back again. Kind of a theme there.
I'm trying to get a visual sense of it. Is it like one bike every 5 minutes or 50 bikes a minute and the pedestrians better, watch where they're going because these people are just zipping by on these things?
Yeah, so if we focus on the boom period, which the book also does spend most of the time focusing on, which is roughly 1890 to 1900, that decade, there were at times they did pedestrian or not pedestrian or bicyclist counts going into downtown Chicago. Cyclist advocates do the same thing today. If you want to get accurate counts of people going, using your bike trails or bike lanes. So if I remember my book right, I believe it was upwards of 200 people per minute at the busiest thoroughfare at the busiest time, like when they're commuting into work in the morning, later 1890s. So there's nothing to compare it to today. The country was bicycle mad, and that was international to some degree as well.
200 per minute. I mean, that'd be like watching a race, right? Like one of these bicycle centuries or something at the start, where you have just all these cyclist after cyclist crowding past.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you would need quite a bit of space just for the bicyclists. They would be taking up most of the road, or there were dedicated some kind of side paths or bike lanes. Even in this early era, there was in some places more bicycle infrastructures, bike lanes, bike parking than some urban areas have today.
Oh, no doubt about that. All right. So, what made you are by trade an information literacy and scholarly communications librarian at Illinois Wesleyan. What made you want to spend years of your life on the history of the bicycle in Illinois specifically?
Yeah, so my undergraduate background is in history, and I was looking for a good long-term project that could sort of merge my research skills as a librarian and then my writing and research skills as a historian. And I was looking for something that made a significant contribution to American history. I think there's a lot of projects that I'm interested in, but not many of them would I spend a decade on and pour all this time and effort into if I didn't think it was important and significant. So that's I think that's the a part of the answer is that I do think beyond the bicycles themselves, the ways that people interacted with them and the social changes that the bicycle pushed. That's what made me commit to writing it and spend all that time working on this particular topic.
You also have a personal connection and experience with cycling professionally, right? At least or triathlons. That's which is a third cycling, right?
Yeah, so yeah, my own background has certainly helped if you're gonna write intelligibly about bicycles and bicycle racing and contributions. I grew up in rural central Illinois, riding quite a bit. I got into triathlon racing early in the 1990s and continued that for about 2 decades. At some point, yeah, I did. There were a couple of years in there. I had a professional card for triathlon racing, raced internationally once. But so that understanding of the nomenclature, right, the terminology for bicycle, the way that they're built, and racing, that all kind of figures into how and why I wrote the book.
So let's go back to that the earliest evidence you found of a bicycle being ridden in Illinois. And I should say the book traces briefly this sort of the story that's been told elsewhere of like the sort of international history of the bicycle and how it evolved from sort of a glider bike invented by a German fellow to the what we call the penny farthing today. People will remember the one with the giant front wheel, the tiny little back wheel. You can see people still riding those on YouTube. Pretty entertaining. To what we now call the safety bicycle. So like how did that make its way from Europe to here in the middle of America in the mid 1800s?
Yeah, it was a part of the research that surprised me was how quickly things moved in that era. So let's see, if we're talking 1860s, something like Chicago, uh, only a couple 100,000 people, probably under 200,000 at that time point. So not really the urban mecca that we think of today. But the bicycles and the velocipedes that the big change in the 1860s was the addition of pedals to bicycles, and that definitely occurred in a Parisian workshop early mid 1860s. So let's just call it about 1863, 64, something like that. But they came to the United States by 1866 and in Chicago 1868. So a pretty quick move from the East Coast to Chicago. And I think there's a technology story there in and of itself about how fast things moved across oceans in this time period, well before flight or anything like that.
It's so interesting, those early bicycles, and I think velocipede, is that the phrase you used? And those had like metal wheels. You would definitely fall off. You couldn't just put your foot down. They looked high enough that you were like practically needed a step ladder, or you needed to be a good athlete, which I suppose most people were a little more fit back then, um, to get on one of those. To then you get to where the bicycle, what is called the safety bicycle at the time, what now just seems like a standard bicycle to us. It seems, largely unchanged. You can look at a bicycle from the 1890s, and I think someone from today could probably get on that thing and make it work. Whereas the velocipede, the penny farthing, that would be a daring feat for a modern person to attempt. Yeah.
Yeah, the design evolution of the bicycles, it's kind of wild that by 1890-ish, the frame design does look like most common bicycles today. We call it a double diamond. There's two diamond or triangle shapes in the frame, and they came up with that when they added the chain drive to the bicycle, and it worked so well that people flocked to them. It was safer to ride than those that high wheel style that you were mentioning. The safeties were considerably easier, and for the people that cared about racing, they were also much faster because they could take advantage of a chain drive system to go faster than they could on a high wheel.
So let's talk about, and let me reintroduce our conversation, actually. If you're just joining us, this is the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey, and we're talking today with Christopher Sweet, who's the author of A History of Bicycling in Illinois, 160 Years of Booms and Busts. It's published by Three Fields Press, which is an imprint of the University of Illinois Press. Sweet is also a professor and librarian at Illinois Wesleyan University in Bloomington. If you want to join us today, 800-222-9455. What is your experience with bicycling? Have you participated in some of the booms we're going to be talking about later, be it the sort of health craze in the 70s, maybe even the most recent bicycling boom, which was around the pandemic? Maybe you remember empty bike shops back in 2020. 800-222-9455 is the number. 800-222-9455. So one of the big central booms in your book, as we mentioned, is the 1890s. What happened? What changed at that time that turned bicycling from a novelty into this full-blown national craze, international craze?
Yeah, I think a couple of things came together. First of all, if you look at 1800s and even beyond, then there there's been a number of sporting crazes. Uh, this sort of this Victorian era, they were looking for entertainment things to do. So before the bicycle, there was a huge roller skating craze. Roller skating races, endurance roller skating, recreational roller skating. They called it pedestrianism also before that, which was competitive walking, and they would walk for days at a time, and just see who stopped first, and this sort of thing. So bicycling in that regard was the next big social craze, the thing to do. So there's that part, that social idea of everybody is doing this that can afford to do it at the time period. Bicycles were quite expensive at the beginning of that boom period. Uh, but so there's a social issue, and then there's some of the design issues that we talked about. Once the bicycle became something that looks like our modern bikes, they were easy to ride. Women could ride, kids could ride. That also set up a boom. And then the manufacturers got in on the game, right? They saw a chance to make a buck, or a lot more than a buck. And so they began to promote it, as something healthy to do, as an exciting thing to go out and watch. So we had the social issues and the design issues all kind of coming together, and that set the stage for that boom.
There was a sentence that's really stuck with me. I think it's pretty early in the book, maybe even the introduction. I'm going to read it here. In the 1890s, Chicago had more than 50 cycling clubs, the largest of which fielded their own football, baseball, and bowling teams. Cycling clubhouses of the day were lavish affairs with amenities like billiard tables, bowling alleys, cafes, libraries, theaters, parlors, lodging rooms, and weight rooms. Talk about, I mean, it's hard to imagine any club, in our bowling alone society of the 2020s, having this sort of amenities and adherence to it. Talk about how cycling really became central to a lot of people's lives.
Yeah, when I came across some of these references, and I wasn't sure I was getting it right. You were talking about the bicycle clubs fielding their own baseball and bowling teams, and I was like, am I reading this right? And I found more and more mentions of it, and the cycling was so central to social identity, right, for a while that they came together in these clubs. Some of the clubs were based on ethnicity, some were based on the brand of the bicycle that you rode. Some of them were more racing oriented, others were more about taking, casual weekend jaunts out into the country. But there was people really identified as cyclists as a big important part of who they were, and then which club that they chose was another part of that identity. And yeah, you'd be hard pressed to find anything similar. Maybe in sort of the Hamptons equestrian clubs or something might kind of look like these bicycle clubs, although these were a little bit more for everyone, even though they had all these amenities in the clubhouses, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I've gotten occasionally as a journalist, you get asked to like moderate a panel or something. So I've been in some of those fancy downtown Chicago clubs that I think do have gyms and maybe even like lodging for people. Nowhere near being at the level of becoming a member of one of those things, but yeah, it seems like having something like that for the everyman, that's fascinating. All right, we need to take a break. We're going to continue our conversation with Christopher Sweet. He's the author of A History of Bicycling in Illinois, 160 Years of Booms and Busts. If you want to join us, 800-222-9455 is the number. We'll get to some calls after the break. 800-222-9455. This is The 21st Show. It's the 21st Show. I'm Brian Mackey, and my guest today is Christopher Sweet, author of A History of Bicycling in Illinois, 160 Years of Booms and Busts. He's also a librarian on the faculty at Illinois Wesleyan University. Has bicycling ever changed the way you get around your own town or neighborhood? You can join the conversation today at 800-222-9455. That's 800-222-9455. And let's go now to the phones. We have Carrie calling from Woodstock, Illinois, on line one. Carrie, thanks for calling in.
Hi. I just wanted to call in and maybe comment a little bit on the change in attitudes around bicycles in Illinois. I'm coming from McHenry County and have spent my whole life here. And I was fortunate enough to be a free-range child in the 80s and 90s, and happily spent a lot of my time, especially during my summers, riding my bike around town and kind of intentionally trying to get lost sometimes to see if I could find my way home. But I always felt very safe and secure in my town, and felt seen by motorists. And so I grew up kind of with, a lack of fear of being out on a bike. And but I also, took some biking classes and knew the rules of the road and how to signal and all that. So I just always felt like I had a good handle on it. And then fast forward to my late 20s, early 30s, my husband and I did a fair amount of road biking together and competed in triathlons and felt very good about that even, I would say, into the early 2010s. We would go out on cross McHenry County excursions, sometimes 30, 40 miles at a time. Not that we're great cyclists, but we enjoyed that and always felt really good about it. And somewhere around the mid 2010s, I feel like our perception of that just really changed, and I'm curious to see if other callers or other cyclists have felt this as well.
That's interesting. So when you say your perception changed, you feel less safe on the roads now?
Definitely, yeah. We had a few incidents here in McHenry County, several rather, where we felt like people were kind of edging us off the road. There was an incident where I actually reached out and slapped the back of a minivan just to bring attention to them, like they had kind of intentionally pushed me off towards the shoulder, and they saw us at an intersection and acknowledged that we were there, and then went ahead and pushed me off. But it was just like a handful of these incidents where there was aggression towards us, revved motors as they fly by, stuff like that, where we just got to the point where we said, it's not worth getting killed. And we really only do road biking on dedicated trails now. We're lucky enough to have running, all the way through McHenry County, the Prairie Trail that goes down to Aurora. So we take advantage of that as much as we can. But I feel like it's just kind of a sad state where, something that we grew up enjoying and loved doing is something that we just don't feel like we can be visible enough or protect ourselves enough out on the open road. And I'm wondering if any other cyclists have experienced this over the last 15 to 20 years, maybe.
All right, Carrie, thanks so much for calling in. And yeah, if anyone else out there, if you feel that way, let us know at 800-222-9455. Chris, let me come to you about that. I don't know if you still cycle. Have you felt a change in the way vehicles interact with cyclists on the road?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a whole bunch of different threads that go into Carrie's comments here, and I do feel somewhat the same way. I said earlier in the program that I grew up in rural central Illinois and riding sort of out of necessity, right? Before I had a car. If you're going to go visit friends or go to your job, it was on a bicycle, and so there's certainly a sort of nostalgia for that time period, and also, there's demographic change that figures into it. That same area of rural central Illinois where I grew up, there just are more people and more cars than the 80s and 90s, right? When I was riding. So I think that's part of the story. We're just getting the population is getting denser. Therefore, there are more cars on the roads. I think that's part of what we're experiencing. Another thing that I thought about when I was listening to the comments is that there's also another element that the more you get into cycling, the more likely it is that you're going to have some poor encounters. So if I'm an in-town bicycle commuter and I ride 1 mile a day back and forth to work, the opportunities to have poor interactions are few. If I do a weekend ride and it's 20 miles, you're just out there for longer. If you really get into it and you're riding 50, 100 miles or something, the chances of having a poor interaction with vehicles over the course of 100 miles, it's just statistically that there's more. So I think that's another of the threads. But yeah, there's definitely some animosity towards cyclists. People want to get to where they want to go in their cars as fast as possible with no impediments. That's part of what's going on. It also points to the need for infrastructure, right? These kind of trails that people are riding on now. It feels much safer. We could use more of those. They could be larger. So yeah, those are some of the things that I was thinking of.
Yeah, 100%. And infrastructure, even in cities, right? There's a difference between a piece of or a line of paint, some plastic cones, and a true, concrete barrier protecting bike lanes.
Big difference.
Yeah. All right, another caller, Steve, calling from Carbondale. Steve, thanks for calling in.
Hey, what's going on?
We're talking about cycling. I understand you have some long distance rides in your past.
I do. When I was in college at SIU, my sophomore and junior year, I rode my bike from Carbondale up to the Chicagoland area. My parents lived in Park Forest, and I did that ride the first year by myself. Took 4 days, and then I did it the next year with a buddy of mine, and we spread it out a little bit and did 6 days on the road. You know, it's interesting. You leave Carbondale, and it's all pretty much farmland all the way to Chicagoland. We took 37 and Route 45, and the people we met were very friendly and interested in why we were out there bicycling the road, and you know, it was definitely an experience. It was a lot about learning about Illinois and all of central and northern and southern Illinois. I mean, you get a chance to see it all.
You sure do, up close and personal. Well, great to hear from someone from the representing the south suburbs as well, Steve. Thanks for calling in. I went to school in Chicago Heights, right next door to Park Forest. So, Chris, I don't know if you want to respond to any of that. You know, listening to both of these callers, and especially something that Carrie said a moment ago, is, you know, as a kid of the 80s and 90s, was biking all the time, biked into adulthood and just kept biking. And I think that is true for people who are maybe Generation X and younger. Sometimes I get the sense from people of earlier generations that they didn't have that connection, and bicycling seemed like, you know, something for kids to do. Can you talk about how it is, it evolved, the place of cycling in American life, which is also part of the story of your book?
Yeah, again, I'm thinking of a couple of different tangents or threads here, and the one that I'm interested to see if there is going to be some social change that comes out of it is like the sort of Stranger Things phenomenon, right? That series got so popular, and it featured bikes a lot, and bikes the way that many of us remember them, riding with your friends around the neighborhood and taking your BMX off-road. It kind of glamorize that maybe, or kids and teens attention to there are other modes of transportation other than, driving and public transportation. So I wonder if there won't be another small bump in ridership just because of the impact of that particular film. But if we go back further, so there was certainly a bust period after that, the boom period we talked about from 1890 to 1900, and a lot fewer people rode during that early area. We're talking like World War I era. But then the first kind of bringing bicycles back towards the mainstream, they did reach out to that kids and teens market. So now you're going to back and you're thinking about especially those Schwinn's, like the balloon tire bikes. They had a lot of chrome. They were heavy. They were designed to kind of look like the motorcycles and the cars of the day. So they were cruisers. A lot of bling to them, and so that was a new market that drove bicycling and really kept Schwinn and other bicycle companies alive. Kids and teens market, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. That would have been the major demographic of riders during that time.
So let me remind listeners we're talking with Christopher Sweet, author of A History of Bicycling in Illinois, 160 Years of Booms and Busts. At one time, Chicago and Illinois more broadly were the centers, arguably, of American cycling life, both in terms of participation and racing, as well as manufacturing. You can join us today at 800-222-9455, 800-222-9455. All right, so you mentioned Schwinn. He shows up early in this story. Let's go back in time a little bit again. Well before his name became synonymous with American bicycles. What was his path to Chicago? And, how did his company end up standing out and surviving from the hundreds of other Illinois bicycle makers?
Yeah, the founder of Schwinn, his first name was Ignatz, which you might be able to ascertain as it was German. So he immigrated from Germany and brought a bunch of German know-how and craftsmanship and technological manufacturing abilities with him. He actually got his start working for a couple of different Chicago bicycle companies before he went out and founded his own company. And when we talk about Illinois and bicycles, Schwinn is what most people are going to know, and really for good reason. Schwinn did go on to dominate manufacturing and racing, really the whole scene in the country for most of the 20th century, right? And that had been covered in another book. It's called No Hands: The History of the Schwinn Company, something like that. So my book tries to tell the other parts of the Illinois story. Schwinn, so it's so important. We still absolutely cover a lot of that. But they were a minor player, Schwinn, through the early 1900s. There were much bigger Illinois companies. They just had the most staying power.
Well, let's talk about some of them. So, Western Wheel Works is one of the ones I think you're talking about. What sets that company apart?
Mhm. Western Wheelworks is interesting because they did go on to become the biggest manufacturer, as far as I can tell, in the world at that time. Certainly, in the United States. I don't think there was anybody else that the numbers I've seen elsewhere in the world producing more bikes than Western Wheelworks. So you could do a couple of different things to try to sell bikes. One is to make them really fancy, sort of high art bikes, and that speaks to a certain demographic. Western Wheelworks wanted to produce as many bikes as they could and drive prices down. So the big innovation for that factory, and this is like when bikes have an impact beyond bicycling. They refined industrial stamping. This is very common even in today's modern manufacturing. The use of great big hydraulic, and in that time it would have been steam presses to stamp metal rather than to like drop forge it. That would have been an earlier technique. It's much slower, and you have to remove a lot of material when you're forging something, pouring molten metal like into a form. So Western Wheelworks developed these big presses, and that allowed them to really speed up manufacturing and drive costs down. And they were really a pioneer of that technology anywhere in the country. And then that would have later been adopted by motorcycle and automobile manufacturers.
Another big name who starts in bicycles and goes to manufacture automobile manufacturing is Charles Duryea. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please correct me. But I love
Duryea.
Duryea. Thank you. I love. He actually builds himself a working bicycle on his family farm. Talk about him.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I wanted to write the book about Illinois as a whole. There's so many books that are just Chicago focused, and much of the bicycling history is up there, but certainly not all of it. And maybe some of the more important parts were downstate focused. So the Duryea brothers, there were two, Charles and Frank, that were interested in bicycles. I think there were others in the family, but those were the two that had a history with bicycles and then automobiles. So they grew up rural central Illinois, initially by Washburn, Illinois. And as you mentioned, as a rural farming family, they could not afford the bicycle prices. But Charles, like many rural farmers of the day, had a lot of just kind of manufacturing know-how growing up on a farm. He cobbled together his own sort of velocipede style of bicycle. Then after he graduated from college, he started to just tinker with bicycles and really got in on the patent game. So Charles got a number of bicycle patents. He was, how can we change it? How can we improve bicycles? And this transitioned from the high wheel style to the safety style. And of course, then the Duryea brothers, their claim to fame, after they both they manufactured bikes for a number of years. They are known for creating the first mass-produced automobile in the country.
All right, we're going to take a break. We will continue with Christopher Sweet, who is the author of A History of Bicycling in Illinois, 160 Years of Booms and Busts. He's also a librarian at Illinois Wesleyan University in Bloomington. If you want to join us today, 800-222-9455 is the number. 800-222-9455. We'll have more in a minute and a half. This is The 21st Show. Stay with us. It's the 21st Show. I'm Brian Mackey. We are talking today with Christopher Sweet. He is on the faculty at Illinois Wesleyan University, professor and librarian there, and the author of a book called A History of Bicycling in Illinois, 160 Years of Booms and Busts. As we've been discussing, there have been multiple bicycling booms. One of the most notable was back in the 1890s, and that is when Illinois really became arguably one of the national, if not international, centers of bicycle manufacturing. It was a huge, huge business here and a huge pastime as well. If you want to join us, 800-222-9455. We had a couple of callers earlier about, whether cyclists are getting the same sort of respect on the road that they once might have. We got a text message from John in Springfield who says, the caller from McHenry County is right. I've biked all my life from southern Illinois childhood to my current life in Springfield, and I have absolutely noticed the change in attitude auto drivers have toward bicyclists. I get the feeling autos believe the roads belong to them and no one else. On the other hand, we have David on the line, calling from the Quad Cities, who I think might have a little bit of a different perspective on this. David, thank you for calling in.
Yes. I bicycled a lot when I was a teenager in the 60s. I graduated from high school in 66, so a different era than most of these callers. But I noticed a lot of bicyclists don't follow the rules of the road. They don't ride on the same side of the road as the cars like they're supposed to. They don't stop at stop signs. They don't follow the rules of the road. So maybe that's one of the reasons they're not getting respect, is they're not giving respect to the rest of the people on the road. And I just yesterday saw 2 e-bikes run stop signs in my neighborhood. So I think there's 2 sides to this story.
Fair enough, David. I appreciate the call. And yeah, I know that's a big concern, especially like in New York City, for example, the e-bikes, which are really, some of those are basically motorcycles. They're hardly pedaling, and pedestrian safety for sure. Chris, I don't want you to ask you to be a bicycle ethicist or anything like that, if that's outside your wheelhouse, so to speak. But what do you make of that?
No, I think it's a common complaint you hear about cyclists, and of course his observations are true, and you can see them in any area where there's a lot of cyclists. So the first thing that comes to mind is I still live in a different small rural town in central Illinois, and I routinely see cars blow through stop signs because it's a rural area. They think, there's nobody here is gonna catch me. They're not, so I can just roll through these stop signs. I can exceed the speed limit. So this occurs in all modes of transportation, right? I guess that's the first point that I want to make. Drivers of vehicles routinely flaunt the laws as well. From the bicycling side, the cyclists that are running stop signs, riding against traffic, they're certainly not doing the bulk of cyclists any favors. Perhaps it's a lack of education. They're not being taught at a younger age the proper way, or they just don't see the larger implications. But that's the thing. We're not going to ever get all drivers to obey every rule of the road, and the same thing with cyclists is what I've seen.
All right, in the time we have remaining, about 10 minutes left in the show, I do want to also talk about another aspect you write about a lot in your book, which is this idea of the democracy of the wheel, right? And this goes back again to that 1890s boom. And, on the one hand, you have this utopian idea that cycling is a democratizing force. The shopkeeper and the attorney, the elite are sort of at the same level, literally and figuratively, when they're on a bicycle. And, as you say, arguably bicycles accelerated the push for women's rights, suffrage, independence, and a lot of other progressive era reforms. On the other hand, child labor was involved in this. Black cyclists were excluded from, Chicago races at the time. There were medical authorities who argued that women bicycling would lead to, deviant behavior and infertility even. Talk about that thread and, some of the evidence that you found both ways on that.
Yeah, so this is my first book that I've written, and one of the things that surprised me after spending so much time with this material over the course of so many years is that I sort of needed all that time to start to identify threads such as the one that we're talking about now. And that's because I was able to look at the way that bicycle advocates and proponents talked about cycling in the 1890s, what they saw as, contributing to a democratic society and everybody making everybody more equal. When it wasn't really the case. They really were mostly talking to other middle and upper class white males because of the costs of the bicycle and because of social norms. But then being able to take that idea and bring it all the way forward to modern times and see how bicycles are being used to address social justice issues in the 21st century, I found that really interesting, and it was a really kind of an important thread to follow through on.
You have a chapter on women in cycling. It's called The Great Emancipator. Did the bicycle actually change women's lives in that era that we've been focusing a lot on?
Yeah, this is, I think, some of the broader social implications and social history implications of the book and why bicycles are important and should be really kind of reconsidered in historians that look at the progressive era. So bicycling was at its zenith as the progressive era was expanding. So, if as a reminder, the progressives, what kind of things did they want? Most famously, their work led to prohibition for a number of years of alcohol sales to reduce inebriation and domestic violence and that sort of thing. But they cared about workplace safety. They cared about women's independence, women's rights, and women's suffrage. They cared a lot about manufacturing safety. This is the era of like Upton Sinclair and the Jungle and the Muckrakers, that sort of thing. So this bicycling came along at the right time to kind of champion that movement. So the two things proceeded in tandem, and bicyclists were sort of like the figureheads of this movement. There were these images of women known as Gibson girls, as for the Gibson magazine. And this was the idea of the new woman. She dressed not like a traditional Victorian woman. She pursued her own education. She sometimes lived alone. She was independent. She was able to work, and they were often depicted as cyclists, and beyond depictions, they often were cyclists just because that was a thing that progressive women did at the time. So yeah, I think that bicycling in this instance did make real impacts in social change.
Can we spend just a minute or two on your methods here? Because you talk about, these magazines and newspapers, and I think, a lot of this stuff is on the internet now. Newspapers.com is a lot of people who maybe have done genealogical research are familiar with that website and others. But you actually had to travel a lot and get your hands on dusty materials to do this work as well, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. From a historian standpoint, a whole bunch of things are not digitized. And I don't know if they ever will be, just because the amount of material that's out there. More is added every year for sure. But part of the appeal for me of doing this kind of research, most of the other writing that I've done in the field of information literacy and scholarly communication, it mostly just involves me sitting at my desk and my computer and researching and writing. So part of the appeal for this kind of project was getting out into archives and museums and libraries and special collections. And because I was focused on Illinois, a lot of those materials have stayed in the Midwest. So Chicago History Museum was the best source for bicycling material. But while I was up there in Chicago, I made a couple stops at the Newberry Library. The Chicago Public Library had good collections up there. Henry Ford, the manufacturer himself, was a cyclist, and he collected a lot of bicycles for his collection and bicycle materials. So I went to the Henry Ford Museum. I went to a place called the Bicycle Museum of America. It's in New Bremen, Ohio, and they had some great collections that they let me access. So yeah, a lot of just spending some time in archives and finding things that nobody's seen in 100 years.
So we're almost out of time here. You end the book with an epilogue, a bicycling dream deferred. Pull on that thread for us. What did you mean by that?
Sure. So if the original dream of bicycle was the great emancipator and democratizer, the social leveler, the book lays out that really was not the case in the early period of bicycle. So the epilogue then looks like what's happening now, 21st century in Illinois with bicycles. There's much less manufacturing going on. There's of bicycles themselves, there's only a couple small companies. But the ways that bicycles are being used to address social justice and other issues is what those early advocates had dreamed of, right? So what kinds of things am I talking about? If you look around the state, you'll find a number of bicycle co-ops. There's some famous ones up in the Chicago area, but also a lot of rural areas and smaller cities will have a bicycle co-op where they will take bikes, keep them from being thrown out with the trash, and they will repair them and like teach repair skills. You can often get a bike for little or no cost if you contribute time and you learn how to do the bicycle repairs. Bicycles are being used to reduce congestion in urban areas, right? You think about the bike share systems like Divvy up in Chicago. It's reducing traffic on the street, which reduces pollution. It can help with overall health and obesity. So just the one thing, a bicycle as a tool at this point in time, if you look and see, yeah, okay, it is doing some pretty cool things.
Although even there, not without some of the old prejudices, as you point out, Divvy bikes were not available in some of the city's south side, the predominantly black neighborhoods in Chicago. Well, at least when it started.
They've been doing a good job of remedying that in the last 5 years, but correct.
Yeah. Well, the book is called A History of Bicycling in Illinois, 160 Years of Booms and Busts. The author is Christopher Sweet. He's also on the faculty and information literacy and scholarly communications librarian at Illinois Wesleyan University. Chris, thanks so much for being with us to share your work with us today on the 21st Show.
Absolutely.
That is it for us today. We are scheduled this afternoon, so if you're listening to our live broadcast Wednesday morning, we are scheduled to tape on Wednesday afternoon an interview with Don Tracy, who is the Republican nominee for U.S. Senator in this fall's Illinois elections. If you have questions for him, you can email us, but don't wait. Only about an hour and a half till we have that conversation. Our address is talk@21stshow.org. Talk at 21stshow.org. You can also leave a voicemail of your question. We might share it during our interview. And you can leave that at 217-300-2121. But again, don't wait. If you're listening to our morning broadcast, call now, 217-300-2121. And then tune in tomorrow when you can hear that interview here on the 21st Show. We do appreciate hearing from you about everything we talk about, your suggestions for future guests or stories as well. Again, our email address is talk@21stshow.org. You can find that and all the other ways to communicate with us at our website, 21stshow.org. You can also find links to subscribe to our podcasts or just look us up on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. The 21st Show is a production of Illinois Public Media. I'm Brian Mackey. Thank you for listening. We'll talk with you again tomorrow.